The Haunted Silence of Kawase Hasui. Part 1. The Beginning. There is a legend whispered among collectors of Japanese prints that one of Kawase Hasui's landscapes, a quiet temple bathed in snowlight, once drove a man to tears so deep he never painted again. It was not the snow I saw, the man said, but my own loneliness staring back at me. This is where our story begins, with silence. Silence so powerful it roared louder than any storm. Silence that Kawase Hasui spent his life chasing, brush in hand, woodblock at the ready, a prisoner of beauty and melancholy. He was born in Tokyo in 1883, the son of a family tied to trade, not art. Yet from his earliest days he was haunted not by business but by light. Morning light spilling across temple roofs. Evening light shimmering on the Sumida River. Shadows moving like ghosts on paper walls. As a boy, Hasui would disappear for hours, sitting cross-legged near shrines, sketching. "Why do you always draw emptiness?" his mother once asked, glancing at a page filled with nothing but rooftops against a cloudy sky. The boy only shrugged. He could not explain it, the emptiness was full. But his path was not simple. In his youth, Japan stood on the trembling edge between tradition and modernity. Old Edo was vanishing, neon and railways began creeping across the land. Hasui felt torn, between honoring the timeless spirit of ukiyo-e woodblocks and the strange, modern silence of the industrial world. At 20 he faced heartbreak. His first attempt to join the art academies failed. Teachers told him he was too timid, his work too weak. But weakness, Hasui knew, was his strength. Where others painted heroic battles or colorful actors, he drew rain. Windows at dusk. A single lantern glowing in fog. It was obsession. An obsession can look like failure, until destiny intervenes. Part 2. The Turning Point. One night, Hasui wandered the streets of Tokyo, sketchbook under his arm. He stopped at a print shop, drawn by a single glowing lantern. Inside he saw woodblocks by Shinsui Ito. They were alive, new, fresh, full of breath. It was the movement later known as Shinhanga, new prints. Hasui knew then, he would not simply copy the old masters. He would become their echo in a modern world. Through persistence and rejection he found a mentor, Shinsui's publisher, the visionary Shozaburo Watanabe. Watanabe looked at Hasui's sketches, temples in snow, bridges in rain, and said words that changed his life. "You see Japan the way it dreams." From that day, Hasui's life transformed into an endless pilgrimage across Japan. He traveled with a notebook, painting not bustling markets or grand palaces, but quiet places most ignored. A lone fisherman under a moonlit sky. A village buried in mist. The final red leaves clinging to autumn trees. And always, silence. Part 2. The Fire and the Ashes. On the morning of September 1, 1923, Tokyo trembled. The earth groaned as if some ancient god had awakened, and in a matter of minutes the city became an inferno. Roofs collapsed. Streets split. Flames rolled like waves across districts. Hasui was in Tokyo that day, clutching his sketchbook as the world fell apart. But worse than buildings and bridges was what burned in the fire: art. Thousands of woodblocks, prints, and paintings, entire lifetimes of creation, reduced to ash in the Great Kanto earthquake. Among them, nearly all of Hasui's early works. Imagine it. Years of work gone in hours. The delicate blocks he had carved with craftsmen, the subtle prints already admired by connoisseurs, all vanished into smoke. When Hasui reached Watanabe's workshop after the fire, he found only blackened ruins. The smell of charred wood and ink filled the air. For days he said nothing. He walked through Tokyo like a ghost, sketching ruins, watching shadows of homeless families against broken walls. "What is left of silence?" he whispered to himself. "When silence is burned?" He nearly gave up. Friends later recalled how he refused food, refusing commissions. What is an artist, he thought, if memory itself can burn away? But tragedy does strange things to the obsessed. From ashes, obsession grows sharper. Hasui decided he would not surrender to loss. If Japan had burned, he would redraw it, piece by piece, temple by temple, shadow by shadow. He began to travel again, but now with a deeper intensity. He wandered through Nikko, where shrines glowed red against winter snow. He sketched Kyoto temples in mist, their roofs bending like old men under the rain. He went north into the silent snowscapes of Akita, painting loneliness so palpable it felt like the viewer's own breath froze in their chest. Every scene was more than a picture. It was defiance. A promise. What burns can be reborn. Watanabe too understood. He gathered artisans, carvers, and printers, and together they resurrected Hasui's vision. Soon, new woodblocks were cut, new inks pressed, and prints spread not just across Japan but the world. Western collectors, hungry for exotic beauty, began to see in Hasui's landscapes something unique. Not the dramatic battles or courtesans of ukiyo-e past, but intimacy, stillness, silence that needed no translation. By the late 1920s, Hasui had become one of the pillars of the Shinhanga movement. His prints sold in America and Europe, sometimes for more than Japanese buyers could afford. He had survived the fire. He had risen from the ashes. Yet victory carried a shadow. Inside him the silence grew darker. When he painted a snowy street in Canberra, the viewer feels not just winter but solitude. When he drew moonlight on a river there is beauty, but also grief. Each work whispered of something lost, something unrecoverable. Hasui himself admitted once in a rare interview, "I do not paint places. I paint memories that have already begun to fade." Part 3. The Poet of Silence. By the 1930s, Kawase Hasui was no longer just an artist. He was a mirror. Collectors abroad called him the poet of snow and moonlight. Japanese critics, often skeptical of Shinhanga's Western ties, still admitted that Hasui captured something essential, a Japan vanishing before their eyes. He painted wooden bridges under rainstorms, country inns with a single glowing lantern, fishing boats rocking in moonlight. Each print was like a still from a dream, frozen forever between waking and memory. When people looked at Hasui's art, they often said, "I hear nothing, yet I hear everything." The studio. His studio was a quiet room in Tokyo, bare but filled with the scent of damp wood and pigments. Brushes lay in small ceramic cups, blocks stacked in neat rows. On his desk, he always kept a half-filled sketchbook, notes scribbled in the margins, mist thicker, snow heavier, lamp brighter in solitude. At night, when the city dimmed, he worked by lantern glow. Outside, the world grew noisy with cars, factories, politics. Inside, Hasui painted silence. It was said that when his wife entered the studio, she felt as though she had stepped into another world, where time stopped, where rain fell eternally on temples, where moonlight never faded. Inner world. But beauty had a cost. Hasui was not a man of great fortune, despite his fame abroad. Prints sold well in America, but in Japan he lived modestly. Friends remembered him as gentle, soft-spoken, but often distant, as though his soul was always wandering in some snowbound village far from Tokyo. There was obsession too. Sometimes he would travel hundreds of miles to sketch a temple at dawn, only to abandon it if the mist was not right. Once, in Niigata, he stayed 3 days in freezing cold, waiting for the exact balance of snow and lamplight. Locals thought him mad. He only said, "Without silence, the picture is dead." The growing darkness. The late 1930s brought more than storms of weather. Japan marched toward war, and the government demanded art that glorified power, soldiers, empire. But Hasui was uninterested in war. He painted no generals, no battles, no victories. Instead, he painted what war would destroy: quiet gardens, moonlit shrines, fragile villages. This was resistance, subtle but powerful. While propaganda posters screamed, Hasui whispered. His landscapes became elegies, love letters to a Japan that might not survive the coming fire. Masterpieces of the era. Snow at Zojoji Temple. A great temple blanketed in white, a lone figure walking through silence. To viewers it was more than snow. It was the weight of history, the fragility of tradition. Evening glow at Hibiya Park. Orange light spilling over dark trees, a city at peace just before dusk. Many saw in it the last calm before night fell on the nation. Moon at Megumi. A village road under silver light, no one in sight. Loneliness, yet serenity. Each print was not just art but prophecy. A vision of silence before thunder. The man and the myth. By now, Hasui was recognized worldwide. Exhibitions in the US and Europe placed him alongside Hokusai and Hiroshige. Yet he did not boast. When asked in an interview if he felt proud to be the successor of ukiyo-e, Hasui smiled faintly and said, "I am not their successor. I am only a traveler in their shadow." This humility masked a deeper truth. Inside, he feared he was recording a Japan that would not exist for his grandchildren. His art became a diary of loss written before the loss even occurred. The world was turning louder, darker. But Hasui painted silence louder than any shout. Part 4. The Last Light. Tokyo in Flames. The year was 1945. Tokyo was no longer the city Hasui had painted. Where once stood lantern-lit streets and quiet gardens, now there were ashes, twisted beams, charred earth. The American firebombing had swallowed entire districts in one night, turning centuries of memory into black dust. And Hasui, the man who had devoted his life to capturing the soul of Japan, lost his home, his studio, his sketches. Decades of work, hundreds of drawings, gone in an instant. When neighbors found him sifting through the ashes, he held a half-burnt sketchbook in trembling hands. He whispered, "The snow has melted. Even silence burns. A broken man, an unbroken vision." Friends feared the loss would end him. But Hasui did something extraordinary. Instead of despair, he began to paint again. Not destruction, not rubble, but the same: rain, snow, moonlight. In the middle of a city gasping for survival, he painted silence. It was defiance. A refusal to let war define his Japan. He often said in those years, "Buildings fall. Empires fall. But the sound of rain remains." Final masterpieces. From the ashes, he created some of his most haunting works. Snow at Shiba Park, 1948. A temple under heavy white snow, standing tall while the world outside lay in ruins. Evening at Kiyomizu Temple. Golden dusk against scarred horizons, serenity against despair. Moon over Tokyo. A quiet city under silver light, reborn from fire. To many, these prints were not just landscapes. They were prayers. Proof that Japan could endure, like the lantern in his prints that always glowed, even in storms. The last years. By the early 1950s, Hasui was frail. Illness slowed his steps but not his brush. In a small rebuilt studio, he continued sketching temples, rivers, and villages. He rarely left Tokyo now, but he carried landscapes inside him. Memories of journeys long past, transformed into dreamscapes. In 1957, knowing his time was short, he confided to a student, "Every print is a farewell. But together they are my diary, a diary of silence." He died later that year. Quietly, like the scenes he painted. Legacy. Today, Kawase Hasui is remembered not as a chronicler of power or empire, but as something rarer, a chronicler of silence. His prints live in museums from Tokyo to New York, collected not just as art, but as time capsules of a world that might have vanished forever. Critics call him the last great poet of ukiyo-e. But to those who stand before his prints, he is more than that. He is the reminder that beauty exists in fragility, that silence can be louder than thunder, and that even after fire and loss, the snow still falls, the rain still whispers, the moon still rises. Closing image: crescent moon. Imagine it. A lone figure walks under falling snow, lantern light spilling faintly across the ground. The city is gone, the world has changed, but in that quiet moment, the silence is eternal. That was Kawase Hasui. The man who painted silence so deeply we still hear it,